Come on, dude. We need to talk about Disney Star Wars continuity, because some of you have been saying it has zero continuity, and you might be more right than you know. But before we get into the receipts, and I do have receipts, we need to address something first. Half of you watching this probably don't even accept Disney's Star Wars as real Star Wars. You've mentally checked out. When The Rise of Skywalker hit theaters, you drew a line in the sand and said, none of this counts. And honestly, I get it. But here's why I think this is still worth doing. Because there's a difference between rejecting something on vibes and rejecting something with documentation. One is opinion, the other is evidence. And what I want to give you today is the evidence, the actual receipts. So the next time someone tells you you're being too harsh on Disney Star Wars, you can point them here and say, no, actually, look at this. This isn't about dunking on people who enjoy the Disney era.
Some people love it. That's fine. This is about holding a massive corporation accountable to promises they explicitly made. Because here's the thing. Disney didn't just buy Lucasfilm and start making movies. They made a very specific promise about how they would handle continuity. And they broke it. Repeatedly. Provably. Let's start there. When Disney acquired Lucasfilm in 2012, Kathleen Kennedy directed the formation of something called the Lucasfilm Story Group. And this wasn't some minor administrative shuffle. This was announced as, and I'm quoting directly, for the first time ever, Lucasfilm had formed such an entity. The mandate was explicit: oversee and coordinate all Star Wars creative development. Not some Star Wars creative development. All of it. The scope was comprehensive. Books, comics, animated series, live action. Everything would exist within a unified continuity. Pablo Hidalgo and Leland Chee, both described as longtime curators and mavens of the expanded universe, were installed as the canon champions. The story group was, in Lucasfilm's own words, essentially the lore keepers for the franchise. Here's the promise that matters. Kathleen Kennedy publicly stated, "We have an unprecedented slate of new Star Wars entertainment on the horizon. We're set to bring Star Wars back to the big screen and continue the adventure through games, books, comics, and new formats that are just emerging. This future of interconnected storytelling will allow fans to explore this galaxy in deeper ways than ever before." Interconnected storytelling. That's the promise. That's what they sold us. In 2014, they made it even more explicit. The announcement stated that future Star Wars novels would be part of the official Star Wars canon, as reflected on upcoming TV and movie screens. Jean Mazur, Senior Vice President and Group Publisher of Disney Publishing Worldwide, said, "With the establishment of the Lucasfilm Story Group and our even greater focus on unified storytelling, we expect our entire publishing program to be stronger and more meaningful than ever before." Unified storytelling. Real-time collaboration and alignment. Everything would be mapped out narratively so that film, television, and other media would all connect. Canon authority was explicitly centralized in the 2014 announcement. They literally stated, "Canon will be whatever Leland Chee of the Lucasfilm Story Group decides is canon." One person. Clear hierarchy. No ambiguity about who is in charge of keeping the trains running on time. That was the promise. Now let's look at reality. How old is Rey? Seems like a simple question. The answer should be consistent across official Star Wars sources. It's not. The Force Awakens released December 18th, 2015. The film takes place 30 years after Return of the Jedi. That's 30 ABY on the Star Wars calendar. Rey appears on screen as a young woman, roughly 19 to 20 years old, based on visual presentation. The Star Wars Galaxy's Edge Official Handbook, published in 2019, explicitly describes Rey as a 19-year-old scavenger during The Force Awakens. Okay, so Rey is 19 in The Force Awakens. Simple. Except the official Lucasfilm timeline chronology, published in 2020, places Rey's birth at 15 ABY. Do the math with me. Return of the Jedi serves as the 0 ABY baseline. The Force Awakens is 30 years later. That's 30 ABY, which checks out with the opening crawl. If The Force Awakens occurs at 30 ABY, and Rey was born at 15 ABY, then Rey should be 15 years old.
But the Galaxy's Edge handbook says she's 19. That's a 4-year discrepancy right there. Here's where it falls apart. Disney Plus visual credits in supplementary materials list her birth year as 15 ABY. The Star Wars The Force Awakens visual dictionary, published by DK Books in 2015, provided no birth year at all. So you've got the 2019 Galaxy's Edge handbook saying 19 years old, the 2020 timeline providing a birth year of 15 ABY, and Disney Plus supplementary materials confirming that same 15 ABY birth year. This is the protagonist of the sequel trilogy, the main character, and the story group couldn't nail down a consistent birth year across their own publications. 4 years of materials, multiple official sources, and they still managed to create confusion about something as basic as how old the main character is. But Rey isn't alone. Let's talk about Boba Fett. Attack of the Clones, released in 2002, establishes Boba Fett as an unaltered clone of Jango Fett. The film is set in 22 BBY, meaning 22 years before the Battle of Yavin. Boba was cloned at 32 BBY, which is 10 years before the Clone Wars began. The Mandalorian Season 2, per the official Lucasfilm timeline published in 2020 and updated in 2022, takes place at 9 to 10 ABY. That's approximately 9 to 10 years after the Battle of Yavin. If Boba was cloned in 32 BBY, and The Mandalorian takes place at 9 to 10 ABY, then Boba Fett should be roughly 41 to 42 years old. He doesn't look 41. Temuera Morrison, who plays Boba Fett, was born in 1961. During 2021 to 2022 filming, Morrison appeared approximately 55 to 60 years old, which is what he looks like on screen. Now, you might say, wait, the clones age at double the rate. That was established in Attack of the Clones. True, but here's the problem. First, Boba is explicitly described as an unaltered clone. The accelerated aging was part of the genetic modification package for the clone army. Boba was Jango's pure genetic copy, specifically requested without modifications. So the accelerated aging shouldn't apply to him at all. Second, even if you argue that Boba inherited some accelerated aging, the Book of Boba Fett never verbally confirms Boba's birth year, never addresses the aging question, and never explains the visual discrepancy between how old he should be and how old he appears. If the story group existed to maintain continuity, wouldn't this be the exact kind of detail they'd coordinate? A single line of dialogue explaining why Boba looks older than his canonical age. Instead, the contradiction just sits there, unexplained, unaddressed. And then there's Poe Dameron. This one is remarkable because the contradiction happened entirely within Disney's own timeline of content. The Poe Dameron comic series launched in April 2016, written by Charles Soule. Over 31 issues running through September 2018, it established Poe's backstory in meticulous detail. His parents were Shara Bey and Kes Dameron, both Rebel Alliance veterans who fought at the Battle of Endor. Poe grew up on Yavin 4, in the shadow of the Rebel base. He joined the New Republic Starfleet as a pilot. His entire identity was built around being a second-generation Rebel hero, raised with rebellion values from birth. The Force Awakens Visual Dictionary, published December 2015, reinforced this. Poe was a dedicated Republic pilot who defected to the Resistance when the New Republic refused to take the First Order threat seriously. That was his story. For 4 years. Across comics, novels, reference books. Unified storytelling, just like they promised. Then, The Rise of Skywalker arrived December 20th, 2019. Suddenly, Poe was a former spice runner on Kijimi. He had a criminal past. He ran drugs. Zori Bliss confronts him about it directly. You were a spice runner. Poe doesn't deny it. What? The second-generation Rebel hero, raised by veterans on Yavin 4, joining the Republic Starfleet out of family loyalty, was also secretly a drug runner first? When did this happen? Before the Republic? During? The movie doesn't say. Fans noticed immediately. The timeline made no sense. How does the son of 2 Rebel heroes, growing up on Yavin 4 surrounded by rebellion history, end up running spice for criminals before joining the military? And why does no comic, novel, or reference book published between 2015 and 2019 mention this? Because they made it up during the Rise of Skywalker's production. That's why. The story group scrambled. In August 2020, 8 months after the Rise of Skywalker released, the novel Poe Dameron, Freefall by Alex Segura appeared. Its explicit purpose was to reconcile the contradiction, to invent a backstory where teenage Poe ran away from home, briefly fell in with spice runners, then returned to Yavin 4 and joined the Republic military. A whole novel.
Written after the movie. To fix a character backstory that the movie contradicted. This is what real-time collaboration and alignment looks like in practice. 4 years of establishing a character's background. One movie scene that contradicts all of it. Then an emergency novel to paper over the damage. If the story group was coordinating all creative development, why did nobody flag this during the Rise of Skywalker's production? Why did nobody say, hey, this contradicts 31 issues of comics and a visual dictionary entry? Either they weren't consulted, they were overruled, or they simply didn't catch it. None of those options look good. And speaking of things that go unexplained and unaddressed, let's talk about strategic vagueness. That's the pattern that keeps emerging. When you look at The Mandalorian, the Book of Boba Fett, and the Ahsoka series, all produced by Dave Filoni, all supposedly interconnected, the timeline becomes remarkably fuzzy. The Mandalorian Season 2, Chapter 16, titled The Rescue, aired December 18th, 2020. It depicts Din Djarin and Grogu departing with Luke Skywalker, with Grogu beginning Jedi training at an unspecified point. No explicit date marker, just sometime. The Book of Boba Fett, Chapters 5 through 7, aired between December 29th, 2021 and January 12th, 2022. These episodes function so much as a continuation of The Mandalorian that fan communities have labeled them The Mandalorian Season 2.5. Din Djarin's storyline continues directly from Chapter 16. The Ahsoka series, Episode 1, Master and Apprentice, aired August 23, 2023. It opens with a text card reading, The New Republic Era. Not a year, not even a general placement, just The New Republic Era. That's the entire temporal anchor for the show. Dave Filoni has not publicly specified exact timeline positioning in any documented interview. His guidance amounts to characterizations like years later, without concrete ABY dating. The Mandalorian databank entry, the Book of Boba Fett databank entry, and Ahsoka promotional materials all fail to state specific years. This isn't accidental. This is deliberate obfuscation. Why would they be deliberately vague? Because vagueness prevents contradiction. If you never commit to a specific year, no one can catch you in a timeline error. It's continuity through cowardice. But when you promise unified storytelling with real-time collaboration and alignment, deliberate vagueness is still a form of failure. Because what it means is that the story group either can't coordinate the timeline or won't. Either interpretation is damning. The sequel trilogy itself had a timeline conflict between its own directors. Director Rian Johnson publicly stated that The Last Jedi takes place in real time, or over 18 hours, across various interviews, including San Diego Comic-Con 2017 and an Entertainment Weekly interview in December 2017. The movie is essentially one continuous chase sequence, with a brief detour to know.But. The Rise of Skywalker opens with no explicit timestamp. Director J.J. Abrams stated in interviews that the film takes place approximately 1 year later than The Last Jedi. The official Lucasfilm timeline places The Last Jedi at 34 ABY and The Rise of Skywalker at 35 ABY. 1 year between them. But Pablo Hidalgo of the Lucasfilm Story Group, the people literally responsible for maintaining continuity, made a contradictory statement suggesting The Rise of Skywalker might occur only weeks after The Last Jedi, rather than a full year. That statement was made on social media circa 2019. It was later deleted. It was later walked back without official clarification. So within the story group itself, the people whose job was unified storytelling, there was public disagreement about when a main saga film took place.
The statement was made, documented by fans, then quietly erased. That's not unified storytelling. That's damage control. And this brings us to the heart of the problem: retcons. Because this is where Disney canon starts contradicting Disney canon in ways that can't be explained away as vagueness or timeline fuzziness. Let's talk about the Holdo maneuver. The Last Jedi, released December 15th, 2017, featured one of the most visually stunning moments in Star Wars history. Vice Admiral Holdo pilots the Raddus into Snoke's flagship at lightspeed, shearing through the Supremacy and destroying much of the First Order fleet in a single kamikaze run. The scene was gorgeous. The theater went silent. Then everyone started asking the same question. Why hasn't anyone done this before? If you can destroy entire fleets by ramming ships at lightspeed, why did the rebels bother with the Death Star trench run? Why not ram a cruiser into it at lightspeed? Why didn't anyone ram a ship into Starkiller Base? The entire tactical logic of Star Wars combat falls apart if hyperspace ramming works this effectively. Rian Johnson didn't have an answer. The movie didn't offer one. It just happened, and we were supposed to be moved by Holdo's sacrifice without thinking about the implications. Then the Rise of Skywalker arrived, and someone realized they had a problem. During a strategy meeting, when a character suggests using the same tactic, the response is, "That's a 1 in a million shot." That's it. One line. No explanation of why it's 1 in a million. No detail about what conditions make it work or fail. Just a hand wave designed to shut down the obvious question. But wait, it gets worse. The Rise of Skywalker novelization, written by Ray Carson and published March 2020, provided more detail. According to the novelization, the Holdo maneuver worked because of specific conditions involving the experimental deflector shields on the Raddus interacting with the Supremacy shields in an unrepeatable way. Then the reference book Star Wars, The Last Jedi, Incredible Cross-Sections, published December 2017, suggested the tactic worked because of the Raddus's unique design. Different explanations, published at different times. Neither in the actual movie that needed the explanation. So which is canonical? The 1 in a million line from The Rise of Skywalker? The experimental shields explanation from the novelization? The unique ship design explanation from the cross-sections? All of them? None of them? This is what story group coordination looks like. A movie introduces a plot element that breaks the logic of the universe. No explanation is provided on screen. 2 years later, another movie waves it away with a throwaway line. Then the novelization invents a different explanation. Meanwhile, fans are left comparing reference books to movie dialogue to novelization passages, trying to figure out what actually happened. Unified storytelling, sure, but the Holdo maneuver is almost elegant compared to the mess they made of Kylo Ren's origin. The Force Awakens, released December 2015, established that Ben Solo was training to be a Jedi under Luke Skywalker. Something went wrong. Ben destroyed the temple. He became Kylo Ren. Luke went into exile. The Last Jedi, released December 2017, showed what happened. In a flashback, Luke stands over a sleeping Ben with his lightsaber ignited. Luke sensed the darkness in Ben and, for one moment, considered ending the threat. Ben woke up, saw his uncle standing over him with a weapon, and everything fell apart. The temple was destroyed. Luke's students died. Clear enough story. Tragic. Made sense within the film's narrative about failure and the limits of heroism. Then, the Rise of Kylo Ren comic series arrived. Published by Marvel from December 2019 through March 2020, written by Charles Soule, the comic told the definitive story of Ben Solo's fall. The story group approved it. It was canon. The comic showed that Ben didn't actually destroy the temple. In the comic version, a lightning bolt, apparently summoned by Palpatine's influence, though this is unclear, strikes the temple and destroys it while Ben is inside. Ben survives. He emerges from the wreckage to find the other students blaming him for the destruction. He tries to explain that he didn't do it. They don't believe him. The confrontation escalates. Some students die, but not all at Ben's hand, and not the way the movies implied. So now you have three versions of the same event. The Force Awakens implied Ben destroyed the temple and killed the students. The Last Jedi showed Luke's moment of weakness triggering Ben's turn, with the temple destruction as a consequence. The Rise of Kylo Ren comic showed a lightning bolt destroying the temple, while Ben was actually innocent of that specific act. Which version is true? All of them are canon. None of them quite match. You could argue they're compatible if you squint. Luke standing over Ben happened before the lightning strike. The lightning destroyed the temple. Then the confrontation with the students followed. But this requires the viewer to construct a coherent narrative from contradictory pieces across three different media properties released over 4 years. That's not interconnected storytelling. That's a jigsaw puzzle where the pieces don't quite fit and you're supposed to pretend they do. And then there's the biggest retcon of all, Palpatine himself and the Sith Eternal Fleet. Chuck Wendig's Aftermath trilogy, published from September 2015 through February 2017, was positioned as essential canon. These novels would explain what happened between Return of the Jedi and The Force Awakens. They introduced Operation Cinder, Palpatine's contingency plan to punish the galaxy for allowing his death. They established Gallius Rax as the man Palpatine entrusted to execute this contingency. They built toward the Battle of Jakku, where the Empire made its last stand and was finally broken. The novels established that Palpatine's plan was vengeance and destruction. If he couldn't rule the galaxy, he'd burn it. The observatory on Jakku, the Imperial fleet's final stand, the death of Gallius Rax, all of it painted a picture of an emperor who planned for death by ensuring the Empire died with him. Then the Rise of Skywalker revealed that Palpatine actually had a completely different plan. While Gallius Rax was executing Operation Cinder, while the Empire was making its last stand at Jakku, Palpatine was simultaneously on Exegol, building a secret fleet of planet-killing star destroyers with his Sith Eternal cult. For 30 years, thousands of ships, a hidden army waiting for his return. How does this fit with the Aftermath version of events? It doesn't. Not really. The Aftermath trilogy presents a Palpatine who planned for vengeance in death. The Rise of Skywalker presents a Palpatine who planned for resurrection and conquest. The first Palpatine wanted the galaxy destroyed if he couldn't have it. The second Palpatine was playing a longer game all along. You could argue both plans were running simultaneously. Maybe Palpatine had contingencies for multiple scenarios. But the Aftermath trilogy never hints at Exegol, never mentions the Sith Eternal, never suggests Palpatine has a backup resurrection plan. Because the Rise of Skywalker's plot wasn't conceived when those novels were written. This is what happens when unified storytelling meets we don't know where the trilogy is going and we're making it up as we shoot each film. The story group approved the Aftermath trilogy. The story group approved The Rise of Skywalker. The two tell fundamentally different stories about what Palpatine was doing after Return of the Jedi. And now both are canon, existing in awkward tension that readers are expected to reconcile themselves. Let's talk about the Kanan comics. The Kanan comic series was published under Disney Canon, starting in 2015. It depicted Kanan Jarrus's experience during Order 66 with specific details. Depa Bilaba's lightsaber was green, not blue, green. Kanan and Depa were bonding with their clone troopers right before the Order came through. The emotional weight of the scene came from the relationship between Depa and her clones being shattered by Order 66. Then, the Bad Batch arrived on Disney Plus in 2021. Same event, different version. Dave Filoni retconned the entire ordeal to include the Bad Batch characters. Depa's lightsaber changed color. The sequence of events was altered. The clones involved were different. According to fan documentation, a lot of the emotional impact that the comic version had was absent in the Bad Batch version. This is Disney canon contradicting Disney canon. Both the Kanan comics and the Bad Batch exist within the post-2014 unified canon that Disney established. They promised that books, comics, and shows would all be equally canonical. They weren't. When the TV show needed something different, the comic got overwritten. But it gets worse. The Ahsoka novel, written by E.K. Johnston and published in 2016, was specifically marketed as canon. It depicted Ahsoka's journey after Order 66, including a pivotal fight against an Inquisitor on a farming moon called Rada. This was supposed to be the definitive version of events. The story group approved it. It was official. Then Tales of the Jedi dropped on Disney Plus in October 2022. The animated series completely overwrote the novel's depiction of events. The Inquisitor fight was different. The timeline was altered. Major story beats that fans had accepted as canonical for 6 years were simply erased and replaced with a new version. Here's the damning part. The Ahsoka novel was published after the story group was established. It went through their process. It was declared canon. And then a Disney Plus show casually contradicted it anyway. So what's the point of reading a Star Wars novel if it can be casually contradicted by the next streaming series? That's the question the story group was supposed to prevent, and it's a question that now has a documented answer. The novels don't matter as much as they promised. The hierarchy of canon that Disney explicitly said wouldn't exist, it exists. Screen content trumps everything else. Always. E.K. Johnston spent months writing that novel. Fans spent 6 years treating it as fact. And then Dave Filoni decided he wanted to tell a different version, and the novel got memory hold. This isn't respecting the unified canon they promised. This is treating everything below the screen tier as rough drafts. And then there's Emperor Palpatine's return itself. The Rise of Skywalker, released December 20th, 2019, revealed that Palpatine had survived his death in Return of the Jedi. The opening text card announced, "The dead speak. The galaxy has heard a broadcast." The decision was heavily criticized because the film provided very little explanation into how the character had survived. The movie's actual dialogue? Somehow, Palpatine returned. That's it. That's the explanation audiences got in the theater. Many fans felt that this retcon was incredibly cheap. Making Palpatine the secret mastermind of the First Order felt like a desperate callback to the original trilogy rather than organic storytelling. Later supplementary content suggested Palpatine was a clone, but that explanation came separately from the film itself, not within the Rise of Skywalker's actual narrative. You had to read the novelization or find external materials to understand how the main villain of your climactic trilogy film was alive. This creates a fascinating contradiction in how Disney handles canon. They promised everything would be interconnected, yet the explanation for one of the most significant plot points in the trilogy finale, how did the main villain survive apparent death, wasn't in the movie. You had to go hunting for it elsewhere. So is the clone explanation canon? Yes. Did the film, the most prominent and widely seen piece of Star Wars content, communicate it? Number. Is this the interconnected storytelling that Kathleen Kennedy promised would allow fans to explore this galaxy in deeper ways than ever before? Because it looks more like we didn't bother explaining our plot in the actual movie, so go buy the tie-in novel. The hypocrisy is structural. They tell you all media is equally canon. Then they withhold crucial plot explanations from the films, forcing you into the books. But the books can be overwritten by the next Disney Plus show. So the books matter, but also they don't matter. But also you need to read them to understand the movies. Pick a lane. Let's zoom out for a second. The most damning evidence isn't any individual contradiction. It's the pattern. Rey's birth year, inconsistent across publications. Boba Fett's age, visually contradicts his clone date, never addressed. Poe Dameron's backstory, 4 years of comics contradicted by one movie scene, requiring an emergency novel to fix. Mandalorian-era timeline, deliberately vague, no ABY dates provided. Sequel trilogy gap, conflicting statements from the story group itself. Holdo maneuver, contradictory explanations across movie, novelization, and reference books. Kylo Ren's origin, 3 different versions across 2 movies and a comic series. Palpatine's contingency, aftermath trilogy, contradicts the Rise of Skywalker on what the Emperor was planning. Kanan comics, overwritten by the Bad Batch. Ahsoka novel, overwritten by Tales of the Jedi. Palpatine's return, explained outside the film that needed the explanation. This isn't one mistake. This is systemic failure. The story group was created specifically to prevent these problems. They had a clear mandate, dedicated personnel, and explicit authority to coordinate all Star Wars creative development. And they failed. Some of you might push back here. You might say, the original trilogy had continuity errors too. Sure, Obi-Wan's memories of Anakin changed between films. The Emperor's backstory was vague. Leia remembering her mother despite Padme dying at childbirth. But here's the difference. The original trilogy didn't have a dedicated continuity department. It didn't have a story group. It didn't have public promises about unified storytelling and real-time collaboration and alignment. George Lucas was making it up as he went along, and everyone knew it. He never promised perfect continuity. He never created an institutional structure specifically designed to maintain coherence. He just made movies. Disney made those promises explicitly. They created an entire department, hired longtime EU experts, announced it at major press events, told fans that everything would now be equally canon. They positioned themselves as the solution to the messy continuity of the expanded universe era. Then they failed to deliver on their own standard. That's not my opinion. That's not vibes. That's documented. The frustration you feel, it's not irrational. It's evidence-based. I want to be clear about what I'm not saying here. I'm not saying Disney Star Wars is unwatchable. Some of it is genuinely good. Andor is excellent. The first 2 seasons of The Mandalorian had real charm. Rogue One told a complete story with emotional weight. I'm not saying fans who enjoy Disney content are wrong for enjoying it. Entertainment is subjective. If you like The Rise of Skywalker, that's your business. I'm not saying the old expanded universe was perfectly consistent either. It wasn't. It was a mess of contradictions, managed by a Byzantine tier system that most casual fans never understood. What I am saying is this. Disney made specific promises about how they would handle Star Wars continuity. They created an institution to enforce those promises. They told fans that the bad old days of conflicting canons were over. And then they delivered contradictions anyway. The anger isn't about nostalgia. It's about promises made and broken. It's about being told that books matter, then watching those books get overwritten. It's about being told that the story group coordinates everything, then watching story group members post and delete contradictory information. It's about being treated like children who won't notice the math doesn't add up. When someone says you're being too hard on Disney Star Wars, you can point to Rey's inconsistent birth year. You can point to Poe Dameron's emergency retcon novel. You can point to deleted tweets from story group members. You can point to comics that got rewritten by TV shows within the same supposedly unified canon. This isn't gatekeeping. This isn't toxic fandom. This is holding a multi-billion-dollar corporation accountable to specific claims they made when they bought one of the most beloved franchises in entertainment history. They said interconnected storytelling. They delivered compartmentalized content with contradictions. They said real-time collaboration. They delivered deleted tweets and retroactive timeline publications. They said everything would be equally canon. They delivered novels that get overwritten by whatever Disney Plus show comes next. They said the story group would coordinate all creative development. They delivered strategic vagueness, designed to prevent anyone from catching specific errors. I'll say it again. Your frustration is backed by receipts. Now, does any of this matter if you've already checked out? If you decided after The Last Jedi or The Rise of Skywalker that Disney Star Wars isn't your Star Wars? Honestly, probably not. If you've drawn that line, nothing I've said here will change your position. And I'm not trying to convince you that you should re-engage with Disney content. But I think documentation matters even if you've walked away. Because the next time someone tells you that criticism of Disney Star Wars is just nostalgia-driven whining, you can point them here. You can show them the math that doesn't add up, the promises that weren't kept, the canon that contradicts itself. You weren't crazy. You weren't being unreasonable. You were paying attention. And that's worth something. Subscribe for more stories like this.